Started. My name is Eben Dennis. I'm the Special Collections Librarian here at Pratt. We're very happy to welcome you back into the building after a long couple years away for what, according to my math, is the 142nd anniversary of Menken's birth. If I did my math wrong, please, I'm sure you'll let me know afterwards. We're really excited to have Dr. Stacy Spaulding deliver the lecture today. Dr. Spaulding's a associate professor of journalism at Towson University, whose work focuses on Baltimore journalism. Her work on H.L. Mencken includes Literary Journalism's Historic Lineage in Defense of Mencken, and the Routledge Companion to American Literary Journalism, and The Intellectual Eater, the regional food editorials of H.L. Mencken, and the journal Journalism History. Most recently, she spent over 7 years conducting oral history interviews that document the preservation of Menken's childhood home at 1521 Holland Street. So we're really excited about today's talk because it's collection-based. Dr. Spaulding decided to donate the collection to Enoch Pratt last year, and that means that the oral history collection is available in the Special Collections Department, where it's preserved and housed, and then made accessible in full audio and transcript on Digital Maryland, which is our statewide digital repository. If you go to digitalmaryland.org, basically after this talk, you can listen to the full audio, read the full transcripts of some of the interviews she'll be discussing today. A couple quick administrative things. If you want to know about upcoming programs here at the library, you can go to prattlibrary.org afterwards, or there's a table out to the side, and we have some issues of Menkeniana. We have some issues of the Compass, which has our upcoming programs. And because this is an oral history themed talk, we also have a couple upcoming programs my colleague Deborah Elfenbein is going to be giving in the next month. So if you want to know anything about those, you can talk to Deborah after the program. Without further ado, Dr. Stacy Spaulding.
Greetings and welcome. Thank you, Eben Dennis and the Special Collections staff and the Pratt Library. And it's wonderful to be back here in the Wheeler Auditorium, which remember was refurbished a few years ago. And it's just looking beautiful. It's lovely to be here. Are you able to hear me? JP, how are we in the back with the audio? All right, great. Is that better? Oh, awesome, wonderful. So I'm very excited to tell you today about my work. And I want to weave together 3 different stories for you. And that is the actual history of the H.L. Mencken House, which you can see here, the story of the Oral History Project, but most importantly, I want to tell you the story about the neighbors who worked for nearly 2 decades to save this house from destruction. This is my first visit to the house. This is in 2011. These are some students of mine from Towson University. We went on a bus tour with David Etlin. We took his famous reporter's tour of Baltimore. David's with us today. Thanks, David. And the Mencken House was one of our stops. It was the first time I had ever visited the Mencken House, and Oleg Panchenko met us there and gave us a tour. And shortly after that, I got a phone call. So this is in 2012, and I got a phone call from this man here. A lot of you might remember him. This is Phil Hildebrandt. At that time, he was the vice president of the Friends of the H.L. Mencken House. And I listened on the phone as he told me that it had been 15 years since the City of Life had declared bankruptcy and suddenly closing the House Museum. And he asked me if I would join the board and help restore and reopen the house as a house museum. And he did his best to explain to me why the house was closed, but I tell you the truth, I didn't really understand all the twists and the turns in the story. All I knew was there was this existence of this multi-million-dollar grant to support the house. There was 2 groups, the Friends of the Mencken House and the Society for the Preservation of Menken's Legacy. But even though I didn't understand all the twists and turns, I did say yes to the invitation. And a short while later, I drove to the house for my very first board meeting, which they held in Menken's parlor. Now, I had moved to Canton about 5 years earlier, so like a lot of young residents moving to Baltimore in 2007 to 2010, I got quite a few ideas about the city from a certain television show, which I'm sure we've all seen. But when I actually started going to board members, which we held twice a month, I found something very different. I discovered the charming Union Square Historic District, and I discovered a group of devoted neighbors who were dedicated to caring for this house and to preserving Baltimore's historic architecture. At garden cleanups, I worked alongside Sarah Littlepage and Betsy Waters, clipping the wisteria. At the German Festival and the Baltimore Book Festival, I stood with Phil Hildebrandt and Richard Pickens, talking to fairgoers about the house, its history, and our hopes that it would be open again. At meetings, I got to know Brigitte Fessenden, Richard Selden, Jeff Jerome, who's also here with us today. And afterwards, in Menken's parlor, we drank beer and ate pretzels alongside Oleg Panchenko and John Dausch. And each year, in preparation for the Union Square Christmas cookie tour, we helped Calvin Kopsa set up his Lionel trains around the base of a Christmas tree in the parlor dedicated to Mencken. These are the friends that watched over 1524 Holland Street for the greater part of a 22-year period in which the house's future was uncertain. And that's from the closing of the City Life's Museum in 1997 to the house's reopening in 2019. These were the people who were willing to sweep a leaf off the sidewalk themselves, as Oleg Panchenko described them. They donated their money, they donated their time, they donated their garden tools and equipment. They brought their own tools to the house to monitor the alarms, to maintain the garden, to eradicate termites, to educate the public, and to attempt to negotiate development rights with the city. Though these volunteers are an important part of the house's story, their personal experiences were at risk of being lost to history. Their personal service was not a part of the Mencken collection. And at a board meeting in 2013 or 2014, Phil Hildebrandt suggested that we record a few interviews with these people, and that was the seed for this project. So when I was granted a sabbatical leave in 2015, I set about interviewing members of this community group with the goal of preserving their testimony for public access and expanding the available archival holdings of the house's history. And by the spring of 2021, I had worked with 16 interviewees to produce 21 hours of audio, which turned out to be about 408 transcript pages. So this collection, like Evan said, has been donated to Digital Maryland, or to the Pratt Library, and made part of Digital Maryland. And it's now available to scholars and to the general public online. This is a statewide digital repository, by the way, hosted by the Pratt and the Maryland State Library Resource Center. So before I play you some of the audio from these oral histories, let's just take a moment to be very grateful that the Mencken House is now reopened. It's been stabilized, restored, and reopened as a mixed-use space. So as of 2019, the offices of the Baltimore Heritage Area Association occupy the third floor of the house and the rear of the second floor, while Mencken's furnishings and possessions have returned to the first floor and the second floor study. And next year, which is 2023, will be the house's 140th year. So the Mencken family bought this house in 1883. It's a 3-story row home on Holland Square for the price of $2,900. And they moved in when Henry was just 3 years old. And of course, this is Mencken's lifelong home. So with the exception of the 5 years which he was married and lived just up the street here on Cathedral Street, that was 1930 to 1935, Mencken lived in this 3-story row house until his death in 1956 at the age of 75. So for many of us, the house's history after the death of Mencken gets a little fuzzy. So let me just take a moment to refresh your memory. In the years after Mencken's death, his brother August, pictured here, attempted to donate the house first to the National Historic Trust and then to Baltimore's Peel Museum. They both declined. When that happened, he made provisions in his will for the house to go to the University of Maryland School of Social Work, along with a $25,000 bequest for its maintenance. And he continued living in the house until his death in 1967. And here's a commemoration of the house that appeared in the Sun at that time. And in just a few minutes, this is a pictorial essay that the Baltimore Sun ran. I'm going to show you some of those pictures in just a moment. At the time of Menken's death, Union Square was on the brink of a revival. So by 1967, city officials were eyeing it as a potential historic district, and residents formed the Union Square Association with the intent of restoring homes and attracting young professional families. Just 4 months after August's death, we have the formation of the very first organization that attempted to restore and reopen the home. This is the Society for Restoring Menken House, and they became the first group to incorporate for the purpose of trying to turn it into a museum. But despite their early efforts, they tried to survey the home and generate photos of it. By 1969, the house was given to the University of Maryland School of Social Work. This is in accordance with August's will. And it became workspace and apartments for graduate students. Union Square became a historical and architectural district in 1970. And by 1975, you have the house was designated as a city historic landmark. And during this entire time, the Union Square Association is growing larger and more powerful, and they are seeing some success in attracting families and inspiring people to restore the homes in this area. So they start hosting a lot of annual events. And at these annual events, Union Square Association Day, various festival days, they start pressuring the university to open the house to the public. The university, of course, this is apartments. They don't have the endowment to maintain a historic landmark or to open it up to the public. So by 1983, they finally say yes to a proposed trade with the city, and they gave the city the house. In return, the city gave them the Pine Street Police Station. So the city restored the house. They spent $180,000 funded by grants and the city, and they opened the house as a museum. As part of the City Life Museums in 1984. And in the following slides, you can compare what the house looked like while the Menkens were living there to what it looked like as a house museum. And on the left, you'll see the pictures that were taken by the Baltimore Sun. This was immediately after August Menken's death. And on the right, you see what the house looked like as a museum. So you can see that we had a lot of the furniture. We have a lot of the books, some of the knickknacks, some of the photos. This is the parlor in the middle of the first floor. Here is the rear part of the second floor study. So we have, again, furniture, clothing, all of these books, all of these knickknacks. Looks very similar. And you can also check out his desk. We had all of the things from his desk as well: typewriters, address books, pens, pencils, notebooks, things like that. Unfortunately, in 1997, the City Life Museums declared bankruptcy, and the Menken House closed. And in the years following the bankruptcy, two groups formed with the intent of reopening a house museum. The first one is the Friends of the Menken House in 2001. This is the organization that I was approached to serve on their board. The second one was the Society to Preserve H.L. Menken's Legacy, and they formed in 2004. Here you go. So we have these two organizations. And then also in 2005, we have this bequest that comes out of nowhere. Admiral Max Hensey from Hawaii leaves a $2.8 million bequest to the Menken House. Things are looking up, things are looking very hopeful, but for nearly 2 decades, nothing happens, and the house falls into disrepair. So the house sat empty for 22 years, and this is the condition of the house when I first started to come around in 2011 and 2012. So there you can see there's water damage. This picture on the left is in the kitchen. This is some inlay. August Mencken did this inlay. This is on the 3rd floor. Damage to the inlay. This is water damage in the dining room. You can see with the floral wallpaper. On the right here is water damage in the parlor. And this is actually an instrument that the Friends of Mencken House installed, because you can see these cracks. This is the 3rd floor upstairs. And you can see the front wall, like happens sometimes in row houses, is starting to pull away. So we have a meter here to measure that and to keep an eye on that. So that's the condition that I found the house in. And that's when I started to get to know all of the neighbors that were working to preserve and to save this house. So the H.L. Mencken Oral History Collection is an attempt to honor the volunteers that this was the house that they worked with for so long to save. And it's also an attempt to untangle my own confusion about these two organizations. Why were there two groups, the Friends and the Legacy? Why was neither one of them successful for nearly 2 decades? You know, there wasn't a book on this. There was no book that I could go look at. There was no file and special collections that I could go look at. This wasn't the distant past. This was history that was unfolding right around me. So the practice of oral history gave me the framework to capture this recent and unfolding narrative. It also gave me the framework in which to create a historical narrative out of a person's personal experiences in order to create something that scholars and the public could access in the future. Just to quickly tell you about the Pratt Library's holdings, the Pratt Library has the largest Mencken collection in the world. However, very little of that actually concerns the house. This is a scrapbook, an F collection. So this photo album is very important. It was created around 1940, and in it, it gives us a photographic record of the house's interior and exterior spaces. There's also another really important file that's labeled F186.1, and that contains correspondence between the City of Baltimore and the University of Maryland. And those materials provide us a record of the house from 1967 to 1983, and that's how I can tell that, you know, the university was a little bit frustrated of all of these requests to open up the house because it's preserved there in that correspondence. So this oral history collection, I'm about to play some clips from you, adds dramatically to the scope of these holdings, and I focus primarily on 1997 to 2020. And I focus on 3 organizational groups: the Friends, which again was formed in 2001, the Legacy, which was formed in 2004, and I also did a couple of interviews with that first group that was formed in 1967. Very briefly, just to tell you a little bit about oral history as well. Oral historians value people's personal experiences, and of course, interviews are key to that. Herodotus's accounts of the Persian Wars and Thucydides' descriptions of the Peloponnesian Wars were based on oral history. In China, during the Zhao dynasty, scribes were appointed to interview people for court historians. And of course, the West African griot storytellers are a well-known repository of oral history. In the 20th century, when recording equipment got more portable, and it's amazing to think that this is a landmark in technology, this is portable recording equipment, oral history really took off. The Federal Writers Project, which I'm sure you're acquainted with, collected the life stories during the New Deal era, including the narratives of former slaves. Universities began creating oral history centers, and the National Archives began using oral history to supplement presidential archives. Locally, the Maryland Center for History and Culture, which you might know as the Maryland Historical Society, houses over 650 oral histories in their library today. And one of the largest and most important of those collections is probably the Baltimore Neighborhood Heritage Project. This is a collection of 200 interviews on working class neighborhood life conducted between 1978 and 1980 by 32 interviewers. Another really important collection is Baltimore 68. This is a collection of 66 interviews on the 1968 Baltimore riots conducted by the University of Baltimore in 2006. Today, the oral history community in Baltimore is active and growing. I'm sure you've heard of the Stoop storytelling series and of Mortified. I think the popularity of these series attests to the cultural appeal of stories. They are themselves a type of oral history, and it shows that you don't have to be a professional historian or a professional storyteller to capture this personal experience. Just this year, a local network of oral historians organized a series of 3 public workshops titled Doing Oral History in Baltimore. The success of that series has spurred more plans for public trainings and coaching to come from Baltimore Speaks, a coalition that includes Pratt's Digital Maryland and Special Collections Department staff, the University of Baltimore, Maryland Center for History and Culture, and Inheritance Baltimore. The Peel Center is actively building a large digital archive of Baltimore stories supported by a phone app, a storyteller hotline, and storyteller memberships. And next year, in 2023, the Oral History Association will actually hold their annual meeting here in Baltimore. The Pratt is also doing a lot to support this oral history community. The department has begun actively housing oral history collections, including the Menken collection. A really important ongoing collection is the Maryland Rainbow Oral History Collection. And this is a project that documents LGBTQ+ people in Maryland, including the founders of Baltimore's early lesbian and gay rights organizations. And both of these oral history collections are online at Digital Maryland. The Pratt has also created these nifty little oral history kits that includes the digital audio equipment and instructions you would need if you wanted to record oral histories. You can also get guidance for your organization on how to conduct an oral history project here from the library and the special collection staff. And Deborah Elfenbein regularly leads programs such as Save a Story, do-it-yourself oral history interviewing, and if you're interested in that, she has flyers on the table outside. All right, so I can't wait to share with you some clips from these oral histories. This is Oleg Panchenko and John Dausch. One of the first interviews that I did was a joint interview with them, and we conducted this interview in the house. Now, Oleg, hi Oleg, welcome. You're just in time. Oleg functioned as the house archivist during the years that it sat vacant, and for our interview, he conducted a walkthrough of the house in its 2015 unrestored state. Alongside him, John Dausch described the Mencken House Museum, which was a time during which he often performed an impression of Mencken sitting in his second floor study. So in this clip, listen to the personal sense of history that John describes feeling while he sat at Mencken's desk and flipped through his address book.
Working upstairs, doing the presentations, I sat on the desk and talked to people behind the desk. I would go over to the drawer. Well, Mencken's things were in that drawer too. A little, I don't know how Mencken typed into a small spiral black book, as it were. But he has a book with the information typed into it, which include all kinds of fascinating names and addresses and phone numbers, including people who were famous writers in New York, down to his pharmacist and plumber. All of these fascinating things that, for that moment, I would look, maybe it occurred to me, suddenly Mencken is not someone that exists in books or in film or in stories. This is a 24/7 real person right now, while I look at his book, with everyday interests as well as fascinating connections. So I just follow all those glorious primary material, sort of impression, but that is very much experience. To be in the midst of his actual things, left there and everything.
I love his phrasing. He wallowed in this glorious primary material. So if you were a visitor to the house during the City Life Museums, as you went upstairs, you might see John Dausch at the desk, acting as Mencken. So while the house was a museum, during this time, curators managed the house, its exhibits, its programming. And this is former curator Molly Neal. And in her interview with me, she told me what it was like to manage the day-to-day administration of a house museum during the City Life era. She also described the impact that the publication of Mencken's controversial diary had on attendance in 1989.
One day I came in and there were all these messages from news and CNN, and it was dreadful. And so they were asking for comments, and I didn't know what it said. I could guess, but I didn't exactly know what it said. So I tried to make a comment that wouldn't be quoted because it would be too benign or boring or whatever. So that worked for a while, but then CNN showed up on the doorstep, and I didn't know what to do. I went and with absolutely no preparation. I hardly even combed my hair. It was awful. And I still kind of cringe when I think about it. But I noticed that after all the things that we scheduled were finished, there wasn't anything else coming up. Nobody scheduled special events, and no one. It could have been chance, but it just seems like they all dried up very quickly.
When the City Life Museum declared bankruptcy in 1997, the house sat empty and uncared for until the Friends formed in 2001 and secured the right to enter the house. John Dash was an early member of the Friends, and he was there the day that the Friends finally secured the right of entry to go in. So he describes in this clip what the house looked like compared to the last time that he had been there. And he's going to talk about termites. The Friends found a termite infestation in this area of flooring between the dining room and the parlor. You can kind of see the boards there are somewhat uneven.
I was here the first day they opened this house after shuttering it when they closed. Having last seen it when it looked like I used to live here, the difference was devastating. But specifically, it was found when we finally came into this house after it had been shut, I think for some time. They found that there had been termites that gathered and were infesting underneath the floor of the dining. It took several months before the city was able to respond to that one. When they did, the destruction was far more extensive, but still, termites were exterminated, and the rest of it saved. Had we not come together and come to the city, and the city come to this house, the termites would have had a feast that led to complete collapse. Who knows how much farther the house would collapse in its own that. If for no other reason than that, it just wasn't for all these reasons.
How's the audio? Are you able to hear all of that audio?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. For our next few clips, we're going to go back in time to the first organization that envisioned opening up a house museum. And this is the Society for Restoring Menken House. This organization was founded in 1967 after August's death. It was spearheaded by a young law student named Dennis Alessi. He's the first one on the left, so I was able to interview him. I was also able to interview Joanne Whiteley, who's standing there in a suit with her purse. The third person is John Allen, and the fourth person is Councilman Tom Ward. So all of these people I was able to interview for this project. So the society didn't last long, and they weren't able to stop the University of Maryland from taking ownership. But two of the interviews, and that's the interview with Joanne Whiteley and with Tom Ward, proved especially important because of the roles that they had played in historic preservation in Baltimore. So I want to play two clips from Tom Ward's interview for you. By the way, I took this picture on a walking tour he did of West Baltimore once, and he had the most beautiful handwriting, just gorgeous. I was very fortunate to secure this interview with him a year before he died, and I later looked at the dates. It was almost a year to the day, which I think really shows you the importance of doing oral history now and not waiting. You're going to hear me ask him a question in this clip. It might be kind of low, but I'm asking him, what was the city's philosophy to historic preservation for the last 50 or 60 years? And I want you to take note of his response. This was a man who meant business. He answers questions in blunt, terms, and he is not afraid to tell you the truth.
The city of Washington has been totally disinterested in never playing any part whatsoever in any decision I ever saw made in the city council or anyplace else. And I also have to say that the Catholic Church, Catholic, is also the same. They have done little to preserve churches or historic Catholic spots.
Like I said, he was very direct, but he was passionate about preservation. He and his late wife, Joyce, were vocal advocates of preservation. Probably you might know that they saved 5 row houses along Lemon Street from demolition and restored them to create the Irish Railroad Workers Museum. Also, while he was a city councilman, he was the only dissenting vote against a highway expansion that would have destroyed our historic waterfront. In his interview with me, he addressed the city's early failures to preserve historic architecture. He talked about the classism and the racism that was inherent in urban renewal programs. And he also described the very first bill that he introduced to City Council as a young councilman. This was the bill to establish the Baltimore City Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation, which you'll hear me refer to later on as CHAP. So here he describes securing the support of fellow councilman at that time, William Donald Schaefer, who even then knew a thing or two about political showmanship.
The rest of the city councilmen are pleased as long as Schaefer was pleased. He was quite a leader in the council, and they would ask him, what's his position? I tell him he's opposed to it. And they said, we're not going to sign it until you get Schaefer on board. So, and Schaefer's now on board. And he asked me if he would sign the bill over top of my signature. And I said, I don't care. So he did.
So he drug his feet and finally supported the bill, and at the end asked Tom to let him sign the top at the top. So now we know what it takes to climb to the top. Joanne Whiteley was a Union Square resident and founder of the Union Square Association. In her interview, she described the revival of the neighborhood in the 1960s. She described William Donald Schaefer's legacy in Union Square. She talked about the effects of gentrification. And she also talked about the right of citizens to demand that the city meet the needs of its neighborhood. So Whiteley lived a few doors down from Menken House, and she claims that she intervened to stop the removal of Mencken family artifacts from the house. So you're going to hear her talk about that. But notice that towards the end of the clip, she also claims that she and another person, they were the ones who came up with this idea that the city should swap the Pine Street Police Station for the house.
So we were living in 1504, and one day I came out, and I just couldn't believe it. There was a dump truck piled high with things from the house. Doors and perched right on top was Menken's mother's sewing machine. Well, I ran back in the house, and I wanted to know what was going on, and they said that the janitor had put the house cleaned out. So I didn't know what to do. I was in a state of panic. I called the police. I called the University of Maryland, and I called Don Schaefer and told him what was going on. And I called Jacques Kelly at the News American. And Jacques got a reporter out right away while Schaefer ordered that the truck be unloaded and everything put back in the Mencken house. And there was some communication between the university and the mayor's office. It wasn't too long after that I was talking to Warren Hoff, who was wonderful at CHAP. It came up that the university wanted a Pine Street Station, and I knew that the city would like the Mencken house because we thought that the city got the Mencken house and we would be able to get some control of what was happening to it. So I told her that I was going to try to approach Don Schaefer about doing a property swap, and she started laughing and said, basically the concept was it would be a good one if we could pull it off behind the scenes.
So that last line, she laughed and said, it'd be a good concept if we could pull it off behind the scenes. I'm about to play the rest of the story for you, in which she does claim to have pulled this off behind the scenes. I just wanted to show you that this is probably one of the most iconically Baltimore moments of the oral history. She claims that she did pull this off, but It didn't happen in some smoky back room like you would think of a political deal going down. It happened on the Ocean City Boardwalk in front of Fisher's Popcorn and Phillips Restaurant when she ran into Hilda May Snopes.
And I was going to be in there, she said, and I forget how, but I ran into Hilda May Snopes. She was going to get Fisher's Popcorn and fudge for Dawn. So we went down and got the popcorn. I was telling her about the Mencken house. And she said, does Don know about this? And I said, no, not yet. She said, well, we need to call. She said, you need to call him now. I said, can I do that? She said, sure, you can do that. So I went to the front porch of Phillips Restaurant. I got a hold of the university. And then I called Don Schaefer's office. He got on the phone. He was so funny, he used to call me child, because his name was child. So I said, well, no, that's where I am. And Hildebrandt got on the phone, and she said, it's me, we were chatting. So she said, listen, she really needs to talk to you. So I told him about this whole thing, and he said, it sounded like a good idea. And I told him I couldn't say anything. He made me promise not to say a word. And I never said a word until now.
So she never told anyone until she told it to us in the oral history. Now we've blown the secret for everybody. Let's fast forward from 1967 to the Friends of the Mencken House. So if you'll remember, the Friends of the Mencken House formed in 2001. And board members from both the Friends and the Legacy were extremely generous with their time. Here you see Michael Lester and Sarah Littlepage. They're both founding members of the Friends who gave me interviews. And they described the group's origins, its early victories, its lingering frustrations. Here's Sarah Littlepage describing why the Friends formed.
Well, it came about because the city had made an announcement that they were planning to get rid of surplus properties in the city. And they were just going to put buildings that they had no use for on the market. And so this was one of the houses that was being proposed to be just sold to anyone. And that's what us interested in people who were the original founders of the Friends of the Mencken started, was because we didn't want to just see it sold to just for a house. It had too much historical significance to the city to have it happen.
And I understand people were alarmed at the time someone was talking about bed and breakfast or.
Well, yeah, but they could have anything. Could have ever done apartments, anything could happen to it. The whole significance of H.L. Mencken's life and his importance to Baltimore as connected to their house would have been just done.
So Sarah and her husband lived across Union Square from the house. Michael Lester also lived in the neighborhood. So these neighbors were among the founders of the Friends. They devised an early business plan and secured the right of entry agreement. And they began this protracted negotiation process, pressing the city for development rights. They stabilized the house by coordinating termite treatments. They repaired water damage. They cleaned the garden. They installed that equipment to monitor the structural stability of the front of the house. Sometime later, in a meeting with city officials, the Sun papers raised the idea of entrusting the house renovations to another group, maybe a group with more institutional muscle. That idea and a $100,000 grant from the newspaper gave birth to the Society for the Preservation of H.L. Mencken's Legacy. So that group incorporated in 2004, and they had board members representing the Sun papers, the Maryland Historical Society, the Mencken Society, and the Union Square Association. And Phil Hildebrandt, representing the Friends, also sat on that board. After a reorganization in 2006, they added more institutional muscle. Representatives from Goucher College and Johns Hopkins University sat on the board, along with others who would prove really important to the house's history, including Brigitte Fessenden, who's here with us today, a preservation planner for CHAP, Mencken Society, Oleg Panchenko, a Mencken biographer, Marion Rogers, and Henry Lord, who's also here with us today, a partner of the national law firm DLA Piper, who was elected board president. Both Henry Lord and Marion Rogers, they are the former president and vice president of this reorganized legacy group. gave me lengthy interviews detailing their organizational successes, such as creating a professional business plan and ensuring the city landed that $2.8 million Hensey bequest. And according to Henry Lord's interview, that bequest was very close to slipping away.
What you may not know about is the lurid history of the $2.85 million Hensey, Commander Hensey grant. And that is like a classic tale of bureaucratic inattention and potential horror. And this is like an epic mistake for a lawyer to make. Whoever wrote his will, this guy had not checked to see whether there still was a City Life Museum. Of course, it was out of business, probably 5 years before that. Just a rudimentary check would have demonstrated that there was no City Life Museum anymore. We didn't do that.
So the will designated this money going to City Life Museums, and there was no City Life Museums. So because of this mistake, letters were probably being sent from the Bank of Hawaii to some dead letterbox somewhere. And that grant might not have come through had it not been for the intervention of the Society for the Protection of H.L. Mencken's Legacy. Many people get confused at this point of the house's history. Why were there two groups? What were they doing? Why weren't either one of them successful for so long? So let me just clear it up real quick. On the one hand, you have the Friends. This is a group of concerned neighborhood activists. On the other hand, you have the Legacy. This is the institutional muscle. So when the Legacy formed, the Friends began to focus more on maintenance of the house. The Legacy took the lead in negotiating a lease and creating a more polished professional business plan. And for a time, things looked really promising. There was money to fund the house, and the Legacy group was actively negotiating a lease. But these discussions stalled a bit over various options in the lease, such as whether or not the group should push for the option to buy the house. And then mayoral administrations changed, which means restarting the process all over again with different staff members. By 2008, the Legacy begins to lose momentum, and the Friends comes to the forefront again, making their case to city officials, meeting regularly in Menken's parlor, maintaining the house, reaching out to the community through the book festival and the German festival. I was a new board member in 2012 when Friends President Richard Pickens, who also served as the Legacy Vice President, led an enthusiastic effort to merge the two groups and to present a united front to the city. At twice-a-month meetings, I still can't believe we met twice a month. We were really into it. We discussed the merger along with our vision of the house's uses, its configurations, the necessary renovations. At each gathering, Richard reported the results of his many meetings and phone calls with Henry Lord, with contractor Marty Azzola, with various city officials. His extraordinary effort bore fruit. In September 2012, the Legacy Board voted in favor of merging with the Friends, which would end the existence of these two, of the confusion. It would end the existence of the confusion about the two separate groups. In October, Richard delivered a new business plan, a new master plan, and contractor's analysis to the city. And in his last email to Marion Rogers, with whom he shared a very close correspondence, it shows you how close we were to ending years of frustration.
And his very last email to me was on October 25th, 2012, and I had to read this one because it shows the sweet optimism that he had, which bounces off the page. He wrote at that time, "Back to more good news. Things are really zooming along. Michael Kagan and Mr. Black met right yesterday about the total package, lease, Hensey, our business plan, the drawings. Mr. Lord and I were not invited, and of course they have queries and concerns, but all are workable and answerable. They think they will go to the Board of Estimates by December. We, the Legacy and Friends, have more work to do on many fronts, but why?"
So things, again, were very hopeful at this point, but this progress ground to a sudden halt when Richard Pickens died unexpectedly of stomach cancer a month later. It was heartbreaking and difficult for all of us. And though many of us had noticed that he had lost weight, we had no idea that he was battling stomach cancer this entire time. Phil Hildebrandt stepped in to lead after Richard's death, but 2 more years of uncertainty and exasperation followed. There was frustration not only on the Friends and the legacy side, but also on the city side too, according to Eric Holcomb, a longtime staffer who is now executive director of CHAP.
Our frustration had to do with there were 2 groups that were not working together. That was a big frustration, and the other frustration was it's like their plans of doing things are they really sustainable, or are they really the best thing to do? Best way to use things is not the best way to do it. So I think there was frustration all around.
Progress began again in December 2014 when the Department of Planning commissioned what was called an organizational capacity study. So this was a $30,000 study with the goal of untangling the organizational confusion surrounding the house. Would the city work with the Friends? Would the city work with the legacy? Would they work with a new nonprofit, or would they work with a merged nonprofit? Who would manage the house's renovation, the long-term maintenance, and the disbursement of the Henry bequest? The final recommendations of this report were ultimately implemented, and a newly renovated Menken house has reopened as a mixed-use space. In Holcomb's view, he thinks this is the best possible outcome for the city.
Well, that's a big win for the city. First and foremost, as another empty house that's occupied, that gets occupied in one of our beautiful local historic districts. The neighborhood really finding a lot of pride in that. So I think that's one. I think the second one is this is a Joe Mencken. He's a national figure, important in arts and letters and journalism, to have his heritage, to have his traditions being preserved and celebrated. I think that's really important. The other thing is it will have a house museum component, but it's not only a house museum. It's also offices for the national heritage area. So you don't have to make money, or you don't have to be sustainable as a house museum. And that's really important too in this day and age, for less and less people visiting actual places, cultural places.
So I hope this gives you a better idea of why there was 2 groups, who the 2 groups were, and how ultimately the whole story unfolded. In addition to explaining these groups, I think the Oral History Project also makes other contributions as well. These are neighbors, Fran and Debbie Rawl and Karen Fretz. I did interviews with them. Karen Fretz lives right next door. Fran and Debbie Rawl live just across the park. They discussed life from present-day Union Square and the challenges of historic preservation. David Etlin was with me when we interviewed Russell Baker together before his death. And he provided a snapshot of 20th century city and newsroom culture. Sarah Littlepage also offered a really important historical account of the Baltimore Street Business District, which of course she has a lot of knowledge of. But for all this project has to offer, there are a lot of figures that are not included here. Richard Pickens, I've already mentioned, died before I began this project. Calvin Kopsa, who was, I think, the most photogenic person I took pictures of at the house. Every picture I took of him was just absolutely charming. He was a Baltimore architect who oversaw a number of regional restoration projects, serving on the boards of the Carroll Museum, Preservation Maryland, and Baltimore Heritage. Also, Robert Teblow passed away before this project began. He was a lawyer and founding president of the Friends, who served on CHAP and as the chairman of the Design Advisory Committee of the Preservation Society. They are named here and they are remembered throughout almost every single one of these interviews. But I think by far the greatest omission of this project is that I failed to secure an interview with the man who inspired it, and that is Phil Hildebrandt. He was a founding member of the Friends in 2001. His contributions to the house and the neighborhood are remembered in many of the interviews gathered here. The neighbors, Fran Rawl and Michael Lester, for instance, noted his abilities as a master craftsman and his willingness to lend tools and teach you the skills that you needed to restore your house. And Oleg Panchenko credited him not only with keeping the house together, but keeping the Friends organization together too. You'll hear both Oleg and John Dausch in this clip.
One stated that many people in the city devoted civil law amounts of time and effort to make the house, but Phil Hildebrandt has contributed the most time and the most effort, and without him, there would be no Menken house, there would be no Friends school, there would be nothing here. So the credit goes to Phil, and he's the one indispensable man.
I think that this way, I agree completely with what Oleg is saying. And I cannot emphasize sufficient. Phil's central importance to all of this, the greatest facts by far is
Phil kept meticulous records of general maintenance and small repairs that the group did around the house. He helped research the locations and conditions of Menken's belongings. He devoted entire weekends each year to staffing booths at the German Festival and the Baltimore Book Festival. He stepped in to lead the organization whenever needed, including after the death of Richard Pickens. But perhaps burned out and despairing that the city would ever grant redevelopment rights, he voluntarily stepped away from the organization in 2014, and he resisted efforts to be drawn back in. And he turned down a number of my interview requests. Here's his wife, Sarah Littlepage.
Phil never does anything. So, weird. If he commits himself to whatever it is he's committing himself to, he put everything else in his life on hold to work on the Mexicans. And he gave an incredible amount of time, and other things suffered because of it. And from the city law, we never got thank you. So it's a very bitter outcome of all this.
So to be fair, this interview was conducted in 2016 when it was still unclear what the House's outcome would be. Now that it's reopened, we know there's a happy ending. But at the time of our interview, we didn't know what was going to happen to the house, and it was still in disrepair. So the sentiment behind this comment is an important one. Phil Hildebrandt and the other Friends and Legacy volunteers labored for the better part of 2 decades, often at loggerheads with city officials. And for most of the time, they never saw results. Did the city even recognize what they had done? Here's what Eric Holcomb had to say during our interview in 2020.
They were doing a great job just keeping the building sound. You know, they really making sure that the environment officer would check it out. So when that kind of went day-to-day operations, they kept that building standing. And that's probably the most important thing. So I give them great kudos for that. I feel for the folks out there, you know, they had looked at the big building, they took care of everything. It is a good structure. For the neighbors that lived in the area or saved that structure, the ones that were really tied to the house.
So you heard him, he said it twice. They saved that structure. That structure exists today because of the neighborhood activists and because of those groups that worked to preserve it, that checked the alarms, that clipped the wisteria in the backyard. That house exists today because of them. In closing, I invite you to join me in giving each of these people a long overdue round of thanks. We have lots of Legacy and Friends board members here today. If you have ever served on the Legacy or the Friends, or if you're currently serving on these boards, would you please stand? Please join me in thanking them for their service. To all of our board members here today, and to those of you that are with us in spirit, we thank you for keeping watch over the house. The house exists today because you stood vigil. And with that, I would like to tell you that the house is open until 5 p.m. today for tours. So please, please, please go over them and tell them thank you yourself. And I think we'll have time for question and answer.
A really insignificant question. I toured the house about 40 years ago. Is the delightful gas under pressure sign protecting the basement liquor supply still there?
Is the liquor supply sign still in the basement?
You have to ask Oleg.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Some of it.
Brigida says it is.
Is it still owned by the city of Maryland? Who actually owns it?
The city of Baltimore actually owns it.
I'm sorry, no.
Are we correct?
City of Baltimore? It is, yeah, so it's not in trust or anything. It's still under bureaucratic peer review.
I'm going to defer to Brigida here, who's the president of the Legacy.
Yes, it's still owned by the city of Baltimore. It's still owned by the city, and the city is also.
So the manager of the Hensey Fund.
In the back?
Yeah, I talked to Brigida about this a little bit yesterday in the Mencken house, and can y'all hear me now? Okay. So my father-in-law worked on all the Apollo missions, right? And they let that mission control go to hell, you know, and they finally got it restored in 2019. Remarkable effort. And, you know, and I visited the Mencken house for the first time yesterday, and it's just remarkable what's been done. So thank you to everybody that's helped preserve that. But what strikes me is such an important figure in Mencken, and then such an important event with the moon landing and the whole Apollo program. Why is it so hard? Why is historical preservation so difficult? It seems that it shouldn't be. And yet, is it just politics? Or, I mean, what do you think about that, Stacy? Or anyone else that wants to comment about it for that matter? It just seems it shouldn't be that hard.
Well, I think Tom Ward's interview was very instructive on this. He spoke over and over and over again about how historic preservation was not a part in decision making, and it really does need to be.
But why is that, though? Is it just bad politics, do you think?
So I have to say, I have to defer a little bit. I didn't do a lot of city interviews. I did interview Eric Holcomb, so I don't really feel that I can represent the side of the city really well and say why historic preservation is not a high priority on that side. Although I will speak in favor of, we do have CHAP, we do have historical districts, but I know that for the people here, we would like it to see it as a higher priority.
Well, thank you for your work.
Have you ever submitted the house to any kind of like larger like city program or something? Like there's a program called Doors Open that they tour a lot of historical and sort of interesting architectural sites, and that's coming up real soon. I think that's in like October. But I was just wondering if you had submitted the house to anything like that in the city.
The house is open. I'm working with the Doors Open people on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it is open.
Oh, all right. Cool.
I need to go over to the house now to make sure.
Yes, in the back.
I just wanted to thank you for your, I'm allowed now, for your description of this whole history of the preservation. I'm very tangentially acquainted with it, and there's Bill Hildebrandt as well, and I do applaud what he did, just as Oleg and John did. But it's also a great overview of the specifics in this whole story, basically, and I appreciate that. One thing I would say to Professor Barr is, we're Americans. We don't pay any attention to history.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. I just, yeah.
Thank
In the end, we do. You know, right? I mean, you should see Mission Control now. It's beautiful, just like the Mencken house is beautiful. So in the end,
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for all the things you've done. It's an incredible set of projects, and I thank you so much for that. I had talked to you before about the personal interviews, and I have my wife, had a personal experience of that, and I was wondering if somehow that could be recorded. Is there a way, or is your project closed?
Oh, yeah, I think that if we want to continue recording, we probably could add to it. The Pratt has these oral history kits. We could keep it going if we like.
Talk to Vince about that.
How about we chat afterwards?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure.
I think what I had mentioned before was a great story, so I would like that to be preserved. Thank you very much. Thanks for everything.
Thank you. And it seems like in Baltimore, everybody's got a little story like this. Some little encounter. It would be nice to have those encounters remembered. Yes.
What happened to the 2.8 million?
That's a very good question. I would like to defer to the board because does anyone want to speak to the status of the Hency bequest?
The board has asked the city of Baltimore to account for where the money is and has filed freedom of information requests and has received unsatisfactory answers from the city. The city did put up close to $1.25 million, which represented restoring the house, but the Hency bequest also called for operating it as a museum. And to this date, the city really has not come through accounting for the money or making it available to use for the purposes of operating Menken House. So that's still a work in progress.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment in reference to the gentleman who asked the question about historic preservation. Obviously, that's very important. And I think in this city and in the state, it has its ups and downs. There's been houses that have been saved. There's been ones that have been demolished. But I think equally as important, and I definitely like to applaud Dr. Spaulding, is her oral history work. Whether it's the Mencken House or anywhere else that's saved or not saved or preserved, what she's doing, just an account of what's going on with these structures is really important. And I appreciate it. I learned so much today from your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Obviously, it won't be preserved, but is the Cathedral Street apartment house where he and Henry live still intact?
Mr. Lord, do you have any details on the apartment, the Cathedral Street apartment? I believe that was restored as part of that's now part of MICA, but it's not restored, correct?
Years ago, I think it became part of the School for the Arts. And that was probably 10 or 12 years ago. And since then, I don't think they've made any effort to restore the apartment as it was, but I think the building itself has been very well preserved historically.
What? I'm sorry.
I think the building itself on Cathedral Street has been maintained by the School for the Arts quite well, but not the apartment where Sarah and Henry lived for a few years.
Yes, thank you. I misspoke. School for the Arts, not for MICA. So the building has been well preserved, but perhaps not the apartment. Thank you. All right. Well, I thank you for your time. Thank you for visiting the library today. And thank you for observing Mencken Day with all of us. And special thanks to the Pratt Library Special Collections team for having me.